Okay, this is a super quick introduction to Rappaccini's daughter. I'm going to give you just the shortest possible summary of the story with a few highlights. So basically it's set in like, I don't know, 1600s, but it's about this kid, Giovanni, who basically goes off to freshman year of college, and his dorm, he gets there and he's homesick, and his dorm's like this old castle, and it overlooks this beautiful garden. And the garden is owned by this crazy looking guy named Dr. Rappaccini, who's super skinny and emaciated and sickly looking, and his beautiful daughter, Beatrice. And of course, Giovanni, just like staring at them, kind of falls in love with Beatrice. It's kind of ambiguous actually whether he's in love with her or just has a crush. He actually talks about it later and how he doesn't think it's really touched his heart, but he's totally infatuated. So, he's sort of dealing with that. And then he also has a professor friend, Baglioni, who kind of warns him about Rappaccini, that Rappaccini's a man who cares more about science, that he does all these toxic experiments with plants. And sure enough, he has this magnificent purple shrub, this beautiful, gorgeous purple flower in his garden that Beatrice considers her sister, and that he raised them together, and that Beatrice, in being raised with this poison plant, is herself poisonous. And so she tends to this plant, and she actually needs the sort of toxic air and energy of this plant to stay alive. And so the opposite of it is death to her, whereas the plant itself is actually killing her father. So she was raised to be immune to it, and he is not, as is no one else. So Giovanni starts hanging out with her in the garden. He's like, "Hey, babe, I like your purple shrub." She's like, "Stay away from it. Not for thy life. It is fatal." So she kind of won't let him near it. And then one day she like touches his hand, and her fingers burn. Like he sees the next like couple hours, like red finger marks burned into his skin because she's poisonous. But she's a sweet, kind girl who's super lonely and lives in this garden. Like she's not poisonous in her heart. She just was raised to be actually physically toxic. And so so he tries to stay away from her, and yet she touches him that one day, and that leaves a mark. And then he realizes one day when he's in his own apartment that like he breathes on a spider, and it shudders and then dies. And then he's like, "Oh my God, am I like sort of sucking up secondhand poison from my kind of hot girlfriend and her weird garden and her creepy dad?" So he worries about it, and he goes to his professor friend Baglioni, who's like, "Let me give you this antidote. It's in this little vial, and this is the anti-poison to whatever it is that Rappaccini's growing in his garden." And so, he takes it himself, and then he wants to give it to Beatrice. So he goes there, and he's mad. He's angry. He says, "I am no flower to perish in her grasp." So he thinks that she almost has this insidious plot to poison him, when it's pretty obvious that she actually doesn't. She's just lonely and wants to hang out with himself. But when he kills the spider, like the important part is that he has to send, along with his breath, he has to send a venomous feeling out of his heart. He knew not whether he were wicked or only desperate. So this idea that the poison is poisonous, but it's only deadly if it's accompanied with the venom of the heart. So you can be physically toxic, but also to be truly toxic, it has to come from within, is one of the notions a little bit. So he, let's see, father created this plant, blah, blah, blah. And then he yells at her all of a sudden. He's like, "You poisonous thing, thou hast blasted me. You have filled my veins with poison. You have made me as hateful, as ugly, as loathsome, and deadly a creature as yourself, a world's wonder of hideous monstrosity. Now, if our breath be happily as fatal to ourselves as to all others, let us join our lips in one kiss of unutterable hatred, and so die." And she's like, "Oh, I didn't mean to poison you. What has befallen me? Pity me. I'm a heartbroken child." And he's like, "You know what you're up to. You're trying to poison me." And she's like, "Giovanni, no, I am not this. I might be this horrible toxic thing, but it's not my fault. And you have to have pity on me." And he's like, "Oh, please, you pretend ignorance. Look at your power." And then he like breathes on a bug and it dies. And she's like, "I know, but it's my father's fatal science and not mine. Never, never," she said, "I dreamed only to love thee and be with thee a little time, and so to let thee pass away, leaving but thine image in my heart. For Giovanni, believe it, Though my body be nourished with poison, my spirit is God's creature and craves love as its daily food. But it's my Father. He has united us in this fearful sympathy. Yes, spurn me, tread upon me, kill me. Oh, what is death after such words as yours? It was not I would never do that to you. And she's like, and then basically she says later on, and he sort of feels bad, and he's like, oh, okay, well, here, take this antidote. And she says, okay, I'll drink it first, but wait and see. And so then the dad shows up, and he says, oh, good, you're not lonely anymore. You've got like a nice toxic boyfriend. And she's like, Dad, how could you do this to me? And why did you inflict this miserable doom upon thy child? And goes, miserable, said Rappaccini. What mean you, foolish girl? Do you deem it misery to be endowed with marvelous gifts against which no power nor strength could avail an enemy? Misery to be able to quell the mightiest with a breath? Misery to be as terrible as you are beautiful? Wouldst thou then have preferred the condition of a weak woman, exposed to all evil and capable of none? So this idea that as a girl, she is powerless, she is weak, she has no strength in the world unless her strength is toxic, and specifically toxic to men. So that poison is the only power she can have. She can't have any power that isn't harmful. And so, it might be a little bit of a sort of feminist argument that Hawthorne was making here in the 1800s. But she says, no, I would rather be loved than feared. You have destroyed me, Father. And then she turns to Giovanni and she says, oh, was there not from the first more poison in your nature than in mine? Because he said all that mean stuff to her. And then she dies. It's very sad. And the men just stand there and they're like, oops. So the moral of the story is that if you place the value and importance of science over humanity, that it can be destructive, and that science itself is not an answer without the human sort of motivations behind it. And then I think there's also the sort of male and female dynamic that, men can be educated, men can have power. Beatrice knows as much about the garden and the plants as her father. She's just as well educated, but she can't go to college. She can't be a professor. She can't go to school. All she can do is wander around the garden and wait for boys to come hang out with her. So, that's part of the story as well. Okay, I think it's time for class. So I hope this helped you understand the story and answer the final question. Thanks.